Ahoy everyone and welcome back once again to I Like Watches. Today I'm going to be taking a much closer look at a Pilot / SKX inspired dive watch by Islander Watches. Mark, you know Mark from Long Island Watches. This particular watch is the ISL-91 and yeah, it is a good looking watch. It's got a 36912 on the dial, so I'm happy. And that is genuinely one of the reasons why I picked this particular watch to review from Islander Watches. The truth is, I reached out to Mark a little while ago, inviting Mark to supply a watch to participate in a watch finishing comparison video. In fact, I reached out to a number of brands and believe it or not, some of them weren't interested in participating. But credit to Mark, he was like, yeah, absolutely, 100%. Which watch do you want? Oh, and if you're wondering, at the moment I've had no reply from Bulliver and Steinhardt. Politely declined. So I'll probably forget about including the Bulliver, but I am half tempted to buy a Steinhardt, you know. Anyway, let's get back to this Islander watch. So yeah, Mark said, absolutely, no problem. Which one do you want? And I knew it had to have a stainless steel bracelet because that's going to be one of the things I'll be looking at in the steel finishing comparison video. I didn't want one with a sort of complicated jangly bracelet. I wanted a case with a mix of brushed and polished finishing. In fact, I also wanted that on the bracelet, and that actually narrowed down my choices quite a bit. I also didn't want to take the piss and ask for one of the expensive watches, so yeah, I stumbled across this one and I was drawn to the 369 and 12. I am a bit of a sucker for 369 12s on dials. Yeah, I really like them, and I like the SKX. I like the monochrome look of this particular watch. Silver, black and white. Yeah, you can't go wrong with it. And I've got to say, I'm actually very pleased with it. And I also have to say credit to Mark. I don't want this video to turn into a love-in for Mark and I, but I have to doff my cap to you, Mark, because you've done something I failed to do. I did try to set up a couple of watch brands, and I've got to be honest, it is not easy. It's a lot of work, and it requires a lot of patience, and yeah, I've not got enough patience, clearly. I ran out of patience and just jacked it all in. So, yeah, Mark is clearly very patient. He obviously has the right temperament for this sort of thing. And, yeah, he's built up rather a vast collection of Islander watches now, hasn't he? But despite all that, neither he nor the watch gets a free pass. And I don't think he'd want a free pass. He'd want me to go pretty hard on this watch. And, yeah, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about this Islander watch. It is my first one, so I'm not really going to be able to sort of build up a proper picture of Islander watches, but it's a start, isn't it? So this is an NH36 powered automatic 200 meter dive watch, and the list price is $399 US, which I do think is a touch rich, but the price is currently actually $329 US, which I think is pretty much bang on actually. I'm sure you don't need me to tell you this, but yeah, what Mark has done is he has recognized a gap in the market, a rather large gap left by Seiko watches, and he's filled it very, very enthusiastically. Initially, he was offering Seiko-inspired watches with the sort of specifications we'd always wanted from Seiko, but they'd always failed to provide. So for the money and the specifications, and I will run through the specification highlights in a minute, I think it's about where it needs to be. And if this watch had Seiko on the dial, it would probably be twice the price. And that is, I think, the main draw to Islander watches. That and customer service. I spoke to Mark very, very briefly, and I just asked him if he could tell me the one thing he prides himself and his brand on. What would it be? And he said customer service. And I have to say, I have read very positive things about customer service. So I think that is what Mark is trying to make one of his unique selling points. I think he sees the AliExpress watches and the value that they offer, but he also recognizes that not everybody wants to import watches from China because there are question marks about warranty and refunds and replacements. And yeah, Mark may not want to be competing with AliExpress watches, but the reality is he is competing with AliExpress watches And I think he can offer domestic customers something that AliExpress sellers cannot offer. And that is, yeah, peace of mind, you know, warranty, no issues with delivery, all that sort of stuff. So if you are one of those people that avoids AliExpress watches, I think this is probably your next best thing. And the sort of specifications that you'll find on Mark's watches that you won't find or you wouldn't have found on the equivalent Seiko watches maybe 5-10 years ago: sapphire crystal, ceramic bezel insert, milled clasps, screw pins, solid end links, solid links, just the overall build quality. They're definitely giving you more for your money than the equivalent Seikos, of course. Now, because I've got this watch in primarily to include in that steel comparison video, I don't really want to go into too much detail with the steel finishing. I haven't spent too much time looking at this watch under macro intentionally because I'm waiting for all 6 watches to come in, so that I can then look at them all with a fresh pair of eyes. But from what I've seen, the finishing looks good, the brushing is nice, the polishing is nice. I'm not seeing any glaring sort of quality control issues. I have had a close look at the crystal and the dial. Because it's a black dial, white specks of dust, debris and DNA would be really obvious. And yeah, I haven't seen any dirt or dust, debris, DNA under the crystal or on the dial, which I am relieved about. Bezel alignment is pretty much spot on as well. The bezel action is actually very Seiko-esque. I don't know if when producing these watches Mark dismantled some SKXs and basically said, I want to make them exactly the same, but the bezel actions are very reminiscent of Seiko watches. And this one is actually, yeah, it's nice enough. One thing I have noticed is if I press down on the bezel more than I need to, so it's, you know, it's a bit like when you're a kid and you go, hey mum, it hurts when I do this, and your mum just says, well, don't do that then. But anyway, I did have a good fiddle with the bezel after I filmed the unboxing video, and I did notice that if I was to put more than just a little bit of pressure on the bezel, it felt a little bit sort of grindy. So whatever cushion or grommet or O-ring the bezel is sitting on, I think you can just compress that and then you start to feel steel on steel. But like I said, it's one of those sort of, well, it only hurts when I do this sort of thing, so just don't do that, I guess. And I do have a couple of very minor complaints with the bracelet. The end links, there's a little bit of movement. It's not a huge amount, but yeah, the end link fit isn't as good as some other watches in a similar price bracket. Having said that, it's better than my Grand Seiko, so yeah, what does that tell you? And the bracelet links, I mentioned this in my unboxing. I was quite surprised at how thin they were. They just look a little bit out of proportion with the case. I mean, with it being an SKX homage, essentially, you know, it's got quite a thick, chunky case. But then you look at the thickness of the bracelet links and they just look a little bit underweighted. Yeah, and it therefore makes the watch feel a little bit top heavy, only a little bit. I filmed the lume degradation clip, and the lume on this watch is, well, it's just okay, I think. Because the lume on the dial is applied onto the dial, not filled into applied indices, it fades pretty quick. Then the lume on the bezel fades, and the hands actually hold out pretty well, but I think the lume on the dial fades quicker than I'd like it to. But there is lume on the logo, which is a nice touch. I'm not a massive fan of the branding. You know what I'd like to see on the dial? ISL. I think we all know what that means. I think we associate, obviously, Mark and his store and his brand with, well, the word island, and yeah, I don't think there's too many words that start with ISL, so yeah, I'm not wild about the circle with the sort of pointer in it, and yeah, I think some lettering would be better. But it's loomed, which is pretty cool. So thus far, I have to say I am pleasantly surprised, and for the price, $329 US at the moment, and of course for those of you in the US, there wouldn't be import taxes with that. So yeah, at that price, I think that is where this watch needs to be. It's decent value for money, but I do want to have a much closer look at the finishing of this watch. In that video, I'll be taking a much closer look at the polishing, the brushing, finishing, the line between the two. So yeah, where one meets the other, is that line nice and crisp? Is the polishing bright? Does it have that sort of ripple effect? I'll be looking at the bracelet, I'll be looking at the clasp, I'll also be looking at the end link fits. So yeah, I want to build up a picture of which brands offer watches with decent steel finishing, build quality basically. So only then, once that video has been produced, will I have a full picture of, I guess, what I think of this watch. But so far, I would absolutely consider getting more Islander watches in on the channel to review. So yeah, make sure you come back, guys, and watch that comparison. So the lineup of watches to be included in that steel finishing and sort of build quality comparison video so far is Islander watches, or this Islander watch, an Orient, a Proxima. I'd like to get in a Steinhardt, a Venetian Eco, and I was thinking, I don't know, maybe a Bolivar, maybe a Steel Dive. I'll know soon enough, and yeah, and then I'll crack on and start to film it. But yeah, if you're interested in Islander watches, I'll put a link to Mark's websites in my video description, and yeah, if you've got any questions, I'm sure Mark will be available, or I'll be available to answer if I can. All right, guys. As always, a massive thank you from me to you for tuning in. I do really appreciate it. Take care, guys. Look after yourselves. You'll see me again very, very soon.